Hi everyone and welcome back to Simplifying Investing. Shane is finally back with me today, but I think the more exciting news is that we have a very special guest with us, Nicolette Boele, who became famous around the country by winning the last election in the electorate of Bradfield by 26 votes. Welcome, Nicolette.
Thank you, Mee. Great to be here.
So Nicolette, since this is an economics/finance podcast, I think our listeners would be quite interested to know that before this, you worked at the Responsible Investment Association of Australasia and some other clean finance groups as well. Can you actually tell us a little bit about your previous life? What do you actually do?
Yeah, so I worked for a few decades in public policy around clean energy and climate change and got really frustrated with the lack of progress towards electrifying the economy. So I thought, instead of doing public policy, how about I go into the finance sector? That seemed to be where if you could translate things into growth and earnings, you might actually be able to unlock some capital and get investment.
What were your money, basically?
That's right. And so that's where that started. And it started probably with the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. That's an interesting way of, have the government participating in deals with commercialising clean tech around energy. And then into the Responsible Investment Association, where I got to work right across the value chain, from financial advisors to the buy and sell side of clean energy and climate solutions up to the institutional investors, which is where a lot of my focus at the moment as an elected MP is how to unlock some of that $4.5 trillion of Australian savings into some of those very long-term and incredibly important future productive assets that, it's the tide that lifts all the boats in our economy. Clean energy.
Do you think we're making much progress on that?
No.
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 I would say we've made some.
We have, but there's been a report that's come out recently that, it's 1,300 days on average for some of those large-scale clean energy projects to get approved.
Yeah.
And I don't know the last time you're involved in any kind of deal flows there, Shane, but that's not very nimble. That's not, giving me a return on my investment or any liquidity soon.
That seems like an Australia problem to me, because you know how Australia is kind of known as having a lot of, being a nanny state a little bit. But how we talk a lot about how building approvals take a long time to get approved in Australia.
50% longer to build a home than it was 10 years ago.
5 years ago.
It is, right? But I also see why is it that the Canadians and the Japanese super funds find it easier to invest in Australia than Australian super funds.
Yeah.
And so it's not just the approvals times, that's a massive headwind, that red tape and some of the green tape, but also I think there's an appetite that's a little less riskier with some of our institutional investors. And also there's this thing that we've got a performance benchmark that they hug and have to hug because the regulation tells them to do that. And that's a headwind as well for unlocking some of that capital.
Because that biases them to some degree to have that international exposure.
Correct.
As a diversifier.
Yes, the modern portfolio theory.
There's been a lot of talk in the US. These guys wrote this book called Abundance, which is this observation that we've imposed so much regulation around doing everything that it's a lot like if you wanted to do what Roosevelt did in the 1930s in the Great Depression to get America out of the Depression, today it would take a lot longer to do that. You can sort of see similar parallels in Australia where we've over-regulated, as Mee was saying, and maybe that is part of a problem in relation to sustainable energy.
It is. It's also I think we've had, it is about choices. And I think the 3-year cycles of government also gets in the way a little bit around that as well. We can and should be doing better on some of these things. And I think having a federal, state and local government involved as approval, consent authorities is another headwind. I'm hoping that the changes to the Environmental Protection Biodiversity Conservation Acts that we put through the end of last year will move to starting to streamline some of those processes. Because when we bring those projects online, when we have renewable energy in baseload positions, we just have cheap energy. Like no one's fought a war over, wind and solar or the sunlight ever before. That gives us not only cheaper energy, it gives us the energy security
but
that
what
we
about
need.
the argument that I agree, and that would be my leaning as well, but the counter argument is something along the lines that the price of energy is set by the marginal supplier, and oftentimes the marginal supplier for baseload energy is gas, and it's the most expensive. So therefore you can have cheap solar coming into the system, or cheap wind, or even cheaper energy out of batteries. But if you're still relying a lot on gas, then you still end up with high prices.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The price of electricity determined by the highest price of gas that goes in. But we've got now over 50% of at least the eastern seaboard is renewables.
Yeah.
That's right. We've seen over 410,000 batteries go onto people's homes behind the meter.
So that means increasingly we rely on the batteries as the backup rather than have to turn on a gas turbine.
That's right. And we'll still need gas peakers. You can't turn one thing off while you're rolling it out. You've got to keep both tracks going because the gas is basically the battery for now. But increasingly, we're going to have those gas peakers be even more expensive unless government plays a role to back that in whilst we continue to roll out the batteries. Yeah. And energy efficiency and all sorts of things too.
Maybe there's a bit of light at the end of the tunnel because the Australian Energy Regulator announced the default price coming down from, was it 10% or something?
Around that, yes.
Yeah, from July.
July
and the
1st.
reasoning was that there's now more wind and batteries in the system. And so that effect seems to be potentially starting to flow through.
I've got a few letters in from constituents that their gas bills have gone up. So
I think ours has as well.
yeah.
It's a little bit of a spiral as well because there are fewer people using gas. So the supply charge per day, regardless of how much you use, basically go up over time for the gas company.
And Mee's got a good point there too. And that also has a inequitable angle on it because the people least likely or least able to get off onto those lovely sort of ceramic and, induction cooktops and get off gas onto solar and what have you on their homes are the ones that usually don't rent in strata or in a unit.
Yeah.
So they are lumped with those big gas bills that have a big fixed element to it.
Yeah. I'm actually trying to do that in my house right now.
Get off the gas.
Yeah, it's changing from gas to induction cooktop and it has been a headache because just a lot of coordinating tradies because everyone knows that we kind of have a tradie shortage here in Australia. It's just really frustrating to switch. But anyway, that's another problem.
We're not going to talk about immigration in an economics podcast, are we?
Well, we can. Because I'm sure we'll get onto housing.
Later on.
Okay.
Later on.
Yeah.
But, I've seen that graph from, was it AEMC, which shows that if you increasingly electrify everything you do, you can actually get your cost down a lot. So turn off the gas, switch to electric vehicles, those sorts of things.
That's it. Again, because the cost of, once you've got your technology in place, the cost of solar is $0.
Yeah.
And the cost of solar in 20 years is $0. And the cost of solar when someone invades Iraq or Iran, I should say, is, $0. So that is definitely the case. And Australia is so strategically positioned to be the most competitive on clean energy in the world. Our space, our solar contribution, it's here. Yes, it's a big place. Those big cables that go across the country that connect us up are still problematic and will be for some time. They're expensive to get in place because we've ignored that investment for the last 15, 20 years when we should have been rolling them out. But once we do this generational shift away from the petro state to the electro state, once we do that, we really, because we're never going to compete on labour costs, right? But we can absolutely have even some local manufacturing here because we're going to be so competitive on the price of energy.
So it's really about seeing the big picture then. We're going through tough times now because of the cost of rolling out or electrifying everything and switching to sustainable.
And we waited so long to do it.
Yeah, because of the climate wars.
Right.
One of the reasons.
Yes.
But there'll come a point where eventually the benefit of all that will start to become apparent.
It's really hard, right? Because as an elected MP, people are feeling that cost of living pinch now. Businesses are feeling, the impact of energy prices on their business now and in their supply chains now. So it is a hard sell, but certainly we're in this crisis because of fossil fuels. So to back in fossil fuels as part of the solution is not going to fix this crisis. We fix this by staying the course on electrification, keeping a very close eye on the role of gas as that peaking and backup for now, and then connecting it all up and having highly decentralised, extremely nimble energy behind the meter and in the meter on the, the big side of stuff as well, across the country.
So how do you solve the cost of living problem then?
Okay, not an economist. I can't, look, I have to say, I do, when I'm not in Canberra, I'm in the electorate doing pop-up offices in the, around Chatswood, Northbridge, Wahroonga. And I don't know if you're seeing it, but my goodness, there are even more empty shop fronts than there were after COVID. Whatever we have in terms of settings, and I know there's a long tail from these crises, so it's not just now because of interest rates, but whatever's happening, it's not helping small business. It's just going the wrong direction. So I don't know, you want to talk budget, Shane?
I do. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. How do we fix it?
Do you think the budget has, my personal view is that the government seems to want to do something about it. Say,
you mean better housing?
About cost of living and kind of improving productivity in particular, which ultimately helps business and the cost of living, because economically, over the longer term, in order to solve inflation, you kind of have to solve the productivity issues.
I agree.
And my personal view is that the government seems to want to do something about it. For example, in 2019, negative gearing seems untouchable to the Australian public, but now they seem to want to do it, to use their political capital to do it. But what's your view like?
Yeah, this particular budget, I think we were all expecting it, right? It's the second term, second year, big majority, 94 seats in the lower house. So on the lead up to the budget, we were all expecting changes to property, CGT and negative gearing. A few days before the election, when we were briefed as the crossbench, I think it became apparent that this was going to be broader across other asset classes, and it was a real surprise. And I think you can see now that the government wanted to rush to pass the legislation, have 2 days talking about it through a Senate inquiry, and only now they're doing the engagement with those impacted people, like startups and founders, like venture capital, which says they didn't do their homework well. I don't think the Overton window was open enough there for that, but on housing it is. So I think on the fairness aspect, getting the next generation frontline workers into homes is a good, very good, strong first attempt. But on the other side, on the productivity side, despite other things like the $20,000 instant asset write-off for small business, that's a big tick, gold star. But, it just wasn't enough. And in terms of the political aspect of it, I understand that they want to try and balance the budget and sort of take the accolades of best economic managers off the blue team. But when you do a big reform like this, you've got to return every single dollar, I think, back to people so that they feel they're not left out, that they're bought into the solution. And I don't think the government did that very well.
Because it seems that it was Treasury pushing for the capital gains tax change to be spread across other asset classes with this argument about tax neutrality. So,
and
which is
theoretically,
logical as an economist, I can get that.
It does. It makes sense. Allegra Spender, the member for Wentworth, who spent a term working on her green paper and now white paper around this, talks very much about how the principle behind this is that when you're young, you're more likely to be working, PAYG, in a job, paying big taxes, as opposed to later in life when you're possibly an annuity or you're in retirement phase and your income is coming passively from assets that sit in share portfolios or what have you. And you're paying less tax then. But actually what you need is to flip that. When you're younger, you need to have more disposable income to get into reliable shelter, renting, or ideally buying. And the tax system is skewed the opposite direction. And I think what the government tried to do, and with Treasury's advice, is to correct that. So again, in principle, I think it works, but the execution of this hasn't been great. And coming out of my most recent job before becoming an MP was in venture capital in hard-to-abate climate sectors, not here in Australia, but in New Zealand. And I can see that those, the changes to CGT with already a whole lot of headwinds around tax and the lack of R&D spending and all those other things is almost like the final nail in the coffin for some of this, early stage, high-risk ventures. That's the opposite of what we need when we want to improve productivity, we need to increase or at least make it possible for people to take risks.
So what does that look like for you? Because I thought that they would do some carve-outs for venture capitals. There was a line in the budget that says that. Or like when I think about New Zealand, they have basically zero CGT, but look at the New Zealand economy at the moment.
No comment.
So like how do you envision that tax system look like for startups, for small business and venture capitals? Do we still keep inflation indexing but lowering the marginal tax rate, or do we go back to that taxing nominal gains with a discount?
All really good questions. And I really do think, because I come out of the clean energy side, so this is the whole thing. It's not homogenous, the idea of startups. You have some real asset heavy startups. You have some human capital IP heavy startups. I would need to do a thorough engagement across the broad range of styles of what we have in this country to do that. I mean, I just recently saw that we had a clean tech company which just went into liquidation. Its job was to use maggots. I know that sounds really full on, but to take waste, so food waste, and make basically food for livestock, and the waste from the maggots goes into, I never thought you were going to talk about maggots on an economics podcast. I know, but it goes into fertilizer, and it's so elegant. It's biomimicry stuff. It's really, really great, but we just didn't have the settings on the tax that made the offtake and everything and work. And it's just sad because it's a wonderful win-win-win solution. So there we go. My answer to that question is I'd want to engage the broad range of different types of businesses to work out those settings. Yeah.
So it needs more time for debate, really.
It does. And this is the thing.
So you can make an argument for housing. It's a bit, we've debated housing forever, but for other areas of the economy, it's more problematic. I think even if you have carve-outs, as Mia was alluding to there, for small business, which are capital light to start with, I think capital heavy small business often doesn't pay capital gains tax anyway. But it's capital light, which is the issue. And there's not much to index when it's capital light. Or in some cases, zero. They might just have nothing more than a laptop when they start their business. Then you're going to have
your minimum 30% on that.
But you've also got an issue in the share market that the impact of the changes could be to bias people, investors in the share market, more towards dividend-paying stocks.
So big companies.
Big companies that have already proven themselves, less for startups or for new IPOs and new companies on the share market, which could mean that the price that a startup business gets for ultimately listing, say, could be lower as a result of these changes.
That's right. And that's the time when you want to get your money out of the business that you put your blood, sweat and tears into at IPO. And that's exactly right.
There's also a point here that a lot of people think, well, these people end up being multimillionaires, really rich. But there's a lot of startups that fail. I think something like only 10% of them ever work. And if you've just changed the tax system in a way which makes it less encouraging to do it, then you're less likely to have a go, so to speak. Whereas in Australia, we actually need more people to have a go.
We do.
I thought the other problem with the budget was that we need broad-based tax reform in Australia, whereas we've only done these two little things. They went a lot further than I would have thought. I would have thought there were arguments to wind back the size of the capital gains tax discount, particularly for property, and there were arguments to limit negative gearing, but the changes went a lot further, the 30% and so on, 30% minimum. I would have thought it would have been more palatable if it was done in the context of overall tax reform, such that people can see, well, okay, I may have less favourable situation in terms of property investment, but I'm getting an income tax cut at the same time. Because we do have quite onerous income tax rates in Australia. Top marginal tax rate kicks in at less than double average earnings. In the US, it's more than 6 times, I think. And that top marginal tax rate is quite high compared to the US. And you've also got this problem where when I eventually retire, I won't be paying a lot of tax, whereas younger people, Me's generation, will be footing the bill increasingly for the ageing population, which strikes me as grossly unfair.
So I get this comment on our TikToks that, you guys complain about the top marginal tax rates because you guys get paid a lot. Whereas, I don't know, like an entry-level nurse doesn't get that.
I know, but even if you go down the tax scales, Australians pay a high proportion of income tax as a proportion of their income than in other countries. We do.
But I guess my question is, do you get that complaints from normal people?
This is the other thing too, right? Like, we went into the election and I really thought, I'm super profits tax. Like, the budget's about choices, and I agree. But there are so many inefficiencies in the tax system. We have this, gas export companies making a mozza. That is, we're not getting our fair share of that. They pay some company tax, but they don't pay necessarily the petroleum resources rent tax.
So just on that, do you think it should really be a case of reforming the petroleum resources rent tax? I mean, that seems to be the main issue, rather than introducing a new tax.
It's because the way it's done, the PRRT, is that, companies can put off forever the obligation or their liability to pay that tax. So I'm not sure the vehicle is fit for purpose. It might have to be
something to do with what do we call that thing where they can
index their cost base over the years.
Cost base over time.
That's why they don't pay it over the years.
I think the principle is what we're talking about, right? Which is that we have, and it's the same with the fuel tax credit scheme, where we have like 16, 18 very, very profitable resources companies dipping into, upward of $3 billion in free money. I mean, Twiggy Forrest from Fortescue's recently been on the air talking about this. These big resources companies do not need taxpayer subsidies for the use of their diesel on their mine sites. They're making, like BHP made, last financial year, the year before, I should say, after tax, EBITDA, 15.5 billion, and yet they were taking 622 million. Well, they weren't taking it. We gave it to them. That's just not good economic management. And it's a headwind to them electrifying on their mine site. So there are so many opportunities, which I didn't really see until I became an MP and looked around. How would I do the budget? They're just obvious savings that we could make, which we could do, to your point, Shane, returning some of those tax savings to people to compensate or to rebalance what needs to be a much fairer and more productive system. Not fairness alone, it has to have the right settings to encourage businesses to grow or to start in the first place, because those businesses employ people. That's a tax base. That's a sense of contribution. People want to have jobs and feel, a sense of value and worth. And, and the whole tax, I know it's not in the remit or the purview of a federal parliamentarian, but it's not just about raising taxes. I think the tax system has to look at, it's the signal that it sends to either disincentivise investment or incentivise. And in the case of payroll tax, I know it's a state thing, but that's crazy. Because
why do we even have payroll tax?
Employing
it's just
people,
totally stupid.
It is. Employing people is a good thing. Don't tax it. Find another way of getting the money through, but not payroll tax.
There was that unfortunate comment from the Treasury Secretary who said the revenue has to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't understand why we have payroll tax. The more people you employ, the more tax you pay. Just doesn't make any sense. I do recall when the GST was introduced, there was some debate about setting it at a level that would replace payroll tax because it replaced a whole bunch of state taxes at the time. And I think there was also talk about stamp duty, but that was a bit more complicated. And in the event, it wasn't done. And that was 26 years ago now, 27 years ago. So it seems that we've got all these issues around the tax system. I would have thought that looking at negative gearing capital gains tax would have been part of the mix, but it would have been nice to do them all at the same time, because everybody could look at them and say, well, I've got something that I wanted out of it. And ultimately we end up with something better. Whereas at the moment, the government's given away negative gearing capital gains tax reform, but they haven't looked at the other things at the same time.
Political decisions. I don't envy the Treasurer's job there. It's a tough one. But and the corollary of that, I suppose, is they could have done the whole shebang and overwhelmed people and taken too long to get it done. And because I'm the MP representing the most unaffordable electorate in the country to get a home from what you earn to what it costs. And we just got to break the back of housing affordability. So, but getting something done, I suppose, is, yeah.
I was surprised at the fallout from the budget, actually. Obviously, you guys have been dissecting it for the past half an hour, and there are issues with it. But obviously, it's not like, 100%.
Not the end of the world.
It's not the end of the world. That's what I thought. And if you look at like polling results since the budget, it seems that a lot of the flows in voters have been falling to the other side, which is the other extreme side, which is One Nation. Since the budget, there have been 2 polls around, and there have been like all these.
Lots of polls. Yeah.
I feel like I feel like the shift politically has been happening for 20 years.
Yeah.
The vote for the major parties has been declining, and certainly, the wave of Teals that were elected in 2022 is just another example of people saying, "Oh, we're not really happy with the 2-party system." So it's not surprising, I think, the rise of people supporting someone alternate to the major parties, because let's face it, the cost of living is real. The crisis is real. It's not just in Australia. I know it's happening globally. But when when you go and you put your kids through a good school and then they come out, they get a job, they work really hard, and they still can't afford to get into a home, let alone like rent something, that something's broken. And we're going to get an entire generation, as we already have, of people who just give up. And that's the last thing we know.
But how do we fix? I mean, you could argue that the government would argue they're doing something on the tax side, which makes it a little bit easier. I would think that's like a short-term fix. You've got the situation where investors withdraw from the market for a little while.
Yeah.
Prices come off maybe 5%, but it doesn't fundamentally solve the problem.
It's one lever. We need supply. We need supply. We do. We need to increase supply.
And how do we do that?
We build more homes.
We build more homes, yeah, obviously.
We build more homes.
Sound like a broken clock saying that. We've been saying that for years.
Yeah, we have to.
But say in your electorate,
yes,
if I go through St Ives now, there's lots of, is it high rise, low rise, or there's sort
medium
of medium density?
Yeah, we've got 4 and 1 or 5 or 6 at the moment. Yeah, and we've got some higher ones planned. Yes.
Yeah, but isn't there a danger that over time that we change the nature of the Australian? I mean, our psyche was all about the quarter-acre block. The Aussie dream was to have your little block, the castle. We made films about this. The castle, They're a Weird Mob in 1966, the film, and the book came out a bit earlier, was all about building suburban homes.
Well, I think it was actually about native title, but okay.
They're a Weird Mob.
Oh, no, not the Weird Mob. Sorry, the castle.
The castle, yeah. Wasn't the castle the one about the airport?
Yes.
Yeah. But anyway, they're wanting to protect their little plot of land sort of thing. And then if you start putting high rises over everything, you change the nature of the Australian economy. I kind of think that it's part of the short-term solution, more high rise, more densification. But longer term, we've got to think about more decentralisation, less reliance on our big cities.
Yeah, and the problem with the Australia, absolutely, it is about trade-offs and what we want. The reason we have such a highly urbanised country, though, is because I think fresh water supply is very, very tight. We've got a very small population, economically speaking, so we need to sort of pile on to the existing infrastructure. I mean, you take a council like Eurobodalla on the south coast of New South Wales, they've got 3 town centres, providing the hospitals, the roads, the schools and everything across 3 town centres with a small rate base is not sustainable.
But if more people were to move into, say, Narooma or something, it becomes a centre, then you could afford to do more things.
Yes. I very poorly tried to do an analogy for Sydney.
And the quarter-acre block would be more affordable.
Indeed. But you do put 8 billion people on the planet. You've got to put them somewhere. And I think I'm going to take Chatswood, for example, right in the centre of my electorate. It's got a world-class metro service now, and it's connecting people across Sydney who never went through there. It really is a wonderful place. It's not a stranger to density, particularly resi that goes up several, like almost 20 stories, and we've got another one that's going up to be 40 stories. We've got 62 stories in North Ryde at the moment. That's been, biggest one. Do people want to live in these places? Probably. I don't know. I think, Shane, the important thing is that we have a mix of housing where people want to live and that they can stay where they grew up. I mean, seniors, for example, they want a ground floor place with not too much of a garden, but they can still have the grandkids over. So maybe a courtyard in a townhouse. So I think the point of this is we have a knee-jerk reaction right now because we have not enough homes. So our solution is, when you've got really expensive land like on the North Shore, the solution is getting density, because developers who you're relying on, the private sector to develop, need a return. So they're going up. I can understand that. It's just pure land economics. But if government wants to create villages, homes, cities, places where people want to live and can stay there and raise their kids there and then have their grandkids and not have to travel. I mean, like my son's living on the Central Coast but works on the North Shore, and he travels every day because he can't afford to live there. That's it. And if we want that, we're going to have a mix of housing, and we're also going to have the government lean into the infrastructure that's required, the open spaces, the storage, and, roads and public transport.
So how do you see the regulation story around property?
Tricky.
Like that stat we were talking about earlier, 50% longer to build a home than it did 10 years ago.
And in Sydney, the cost of a new
regulation.
greenfield development, 40% of that is actually regulations and taxes.
Yeah, and just availability of land. There's not a lot of land sitting around doing not much at all. Certainly where I am, we've got,
But we have piled on regulation. To get a house approved takes seemingly longer. To then get it completed takes a lot longer, and there's a lot more checks along the way. Now, sure, we want to make sure that buildings don't fall down and meet certain standards, including around the environment, but there's an argument that maybe it's all gone too far.
We definitely need to build more homes because we've got a housing affordability crisis, or a housing supply crisis, that's for sure. I'm particularly interested as well in the role of superannuation to participate in the provision of affordable homes. I think there's not a great appetite for the government to spend more money on public and social housing, given its debt levels in as well. But we have $4.5 trillion sitting in people's private savings, which could be investing in some of those really long-term patient assets that also contribute constructively to productivity for the economy, but also great risk-adjusted returns over the long term for members. Affordable housing is one of those. And I recently sat down with a housing provider, Hope Housing. Beautiful business model. You can't invest in them, so it's not, I'm writing that down. I don't think so. Maybe you can. But it's almost consistent with like the Sharia kind of finance, where there's an equity position taken with essential workers. So if you're a police officer, for example, you go and get your normal mortgage with the police bank. But then instead of just being able to afford maybe like a 1 or 2 bedroom place with the money that you can borrow with your wage, this organisation, housing group, comes in and offers you an extension of that mortgage, because they're investors who are high net wealth or wholesale investors will take they're not asking you to pay them rent or have any kind of liquidity now. But they're taking a position in that home. And the only thing is that you get offered every year or two to buy a bit more of that equity back off, which creates the liquidity back to the investor. But it's a beautifully simple way of getting creative. And if we just fix some of the settings, the regulatory settings for our super funds to be able to be part of that solution, we could have more of these affordable homes for people that need to live closer to where they work. I don't want any police officer, I don't want anyone working in a hospital on a night shift driving home 2 hours to where they can afford to live.
Yeah.
I want them in my community.
The changes to the annual performance test might help.
It might help.
Yeah,
we've got a consultation paper open at the moment until Friday. It's a good first step, but there's some room for more. We need different asset classes that people can.
So this is basically where things like venture capital, I think, is possibly also excluded, and housing excluded from the annual performance test.
And also some of the clean energy investments too.
Yeah, I forgot that one. Just on this if we can't sort of not mention it, that is immigration, because it seems to be driving a lot of support for One Nation, or maybe it's not, but it seems to me that
it is. Actually, just went on One Nation website today to see what their policies are.
Oh, they have policies?
They do have policies, but it's very light on details. The COVID-19 policies is still on there, but yes, obviously.
But I thought on immigration they want to cut to...
They don't have a numbers there, no.
But I think the aspiration was net zero or something.
Oh, that's a catchy term.
Net zero. I don't know. Where'd they get that one from? But they were talking about 130,000 I think Coalition's talking about 165,000. Currently this year we're running 300,000 or something. I kind of think that we need to get the balance right, and it got too high in the last few years. But then the more I looked into it, the more I realised how complicated it is, because a lot of it was students returning to Australian universities, but all of those who would have normally left when they graduated weren't here to leave because they left at the time of COVID. So you had this mismatch. You had more coming in than would be going out the other way, and we got this explosion of numbers.
And I don't have numbers either. I do know, though, when I go and listen to people running small businesses, they say, I don't have someone who can be my barista.
Yeah.
I don't have, there is, we got about as full employment as you probably want to get. We need some targeted immigration for some of the key, building homes.
So maybe
those types of things.
the categories that come in should be more targeted.
I think so.
Towards home building and so on.
But we can't, deny that obviously that catchphrase net zero immigration has gained One Nation a lot of support if you look at the polls in recent days.
Yeah.
I've kind of mentioned after the budget as well.
So it says net zero on there.
It doesn't say net zero, but it says a lot of random things. You guys should go and have a look. But I guess before we let you go, Nicolette, you have always positioned yourself as the sensible centre. We do want to hear your thoughts on whether the sensible centre has a place in this day and age where, social media seems to magnify grievance and One Nation and complaints.
Yeah.
Do you worry that it's going to be hard?
To get your policy
social media
across.
Is built for One Nation and Farage and Trump and all the others.
Yeah, and I've got to say the discontent with the major parties is there's not that much difference, frankly, from someone who might, apart from possibly some of the positions on not acknowledging that we are one of the most successful and wonderful multicultural nations in the world, and the success of our economy is built on migrants. But generally, I feel there's just a crankiness with the major parties for not making decisions in the best interests of us, of the people. And we're feeling it. I don't know. I can look at interest rates, Reserve Bank, and I can listen to economists about their theories about things. But what it feels like when you walk down the high street of Artarmon is it just doesn't feel good. I don't feel like people are working harder than ever and they're just not getting ahead. So I can understand why the orange team, I should say, is polling so well. But I have to say, I can't be distracted by social media. I'm late to the party. Excuse me, as a parliamentarian, because I've had 35 years of real world experience in clean energy and in finance. I want to bring that experience into Parliament House. And I'm going to work, I know the word sensible, if you knew me personally, is a funny word, but my policies are sensible because I pick the things that are good economic management, good on climate, good on national security. And that's things like electrifying and making sure that we can be independent with our energy systems, and we can have really cheap energy that's reliable, that underpins our productivity and our competitiveness internationally. There's no downside to that. And I'm going to continue to work very hard to make sure that we pull all the levers possible, tax, regulation around super, and all of those things to make sure that we can get that money flowing in that direction, because that's what our economy needs.
So, from your point of view, the sensible centre sort of resonates with me, and I thought that was one of the great things about Australia. We sort of flip and flop between the centre left and the centre right, and ultimately we end up with something that turns out pretty well, and you've just got to go overseas and then come back again and realise how good things are in Australia compared to many other countries. But it also seems kind of boring. If people are upset with the major parties and you're saying, well, we're just going to be in the sensible centre, it seems kind of boring. Maybe it doesn't matter in the electorates that the Teals operate in. It's not as big an issue, but it could.
Are you asking me
potentially
to
limit
wear lycra or something? I don't know. Unfortunately,
I like the colour.
Unfortunately, tax reform is also pretty boring to most people, but it's important, and I think that's the difference. I don't want to be distracted with headlines that are, feeding the algorithm. We have to stay the course, even if it is not particularly sexy, because we need solutions, and the communities that I represent, they know the solutions because they feel the problems every day. So stay the course. Do we need more different marketing team? Maybe. But from a policy perspective, I think we know what solutions we need.
So you would be relying on enough sensible Australians out there to recognise that?
I never underestimate Australians. I think we are entrepreneurial. We look after each other. That's what makes us different to most other places. We're proud that we are made up of people from all around the world. I genuinely do. I also acknowledge, though, that there are people feeling very let down by the major parties. And there's a fine part by that. I don't think that that's in conflict. I think we can find more common ground working constructively together than apart.
Makes sense. Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground there, Nicolette, and I want to thank you so much for coming on our podcast today. Me and I have really appreciated it, and all the best. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, Shane.